Labour Party pledge to scrap university tuition fees, which sounds like a great idea to help the hard-pressed, the poorer students. But is it in fact? Well, Daniel Mahoney is Deputy Director and Head of Economic Research at the Centre for Policy Studies and has been looking at this. Daniel, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Just to check, the Centre for Policy Studies is sort of slightly right-wing. It's got connections to the Tory party, hasn't it?
It's a centre-right think tank, and it was set up by Margaret Thatcher and Keith Joseph in the 1970s, but it's not directly linked to the Conservative Party.
No, nevertheless, it has a sort of slightly right-wing tinge to it, so therefore we couldn't really expect you to be totally in favour of the scrapping of tuition fees, even if it was a good idea.
As I say, we are a centre-right think tank, but obviously our research, we believe, is obviously rigorous and based on sound reasoning. Yeah.
So tell me why then you think it's hugely irresponsible.
Okay, well, I think obviously the fiscal implications for the Treasury have been discussed quite widely, and I think it's irresponsible in that way. But what we wanted to highlight in this report is that it's actually socially regressive, and we pointed out three key ways that it's socially regressive. So graduates, on average, earn nearly $10,000 a year more than non-graduates. And what this policy effectively does is gets non-graduates to subsidise graduates who earn more on average. That would be exacerbated if Jeremy Corbyn went through with his pledge to write off the debts of existing debts accumulated by graduates. And then thirdly, if you look at Scotland, where there are no tuition fees, a far lower proportion of disadvantaged youngsters actually go to university. So I think there are three key ways where this policy could be socially regressive.
Explain first of all, though, why in Scotland fewer poor people go to university.
Well, so overall the places are capped. So the Scottish Government has to cap places for Scottish and EU students, and that's because it comes, they're paid for by the taxpayer. And what seems to happen is that when the places are rationed, that seems to disproportionately disadvantage those from lower income backgrounds. So just to put some figures on this, in England the advantaged to disadvantaged ratio is 2.4, but that rises to 3.5 in Scotland. So there's this clear problem in Scotland that fewer disadvantaged children are getting into university.
And how do you check whether somebody is poor? What constitutes poor in Britain?
So what we're using is the UCAS figures. So they split that up into quintiles, so 20% groups, so from 1 to 5. So 1 being the poorest and 5 being the wealthiest. And that advantage to disadvantage ratio is the top fifth compared to the bottom fifth.
Right, OK, I understand.
Yeah.
Now, there is a suggestion that really the way that we could get a more educated nation, because after all, we want educated people, don't we? The whole point is that we don't want a huge swathe of people who are not who are not educated. Where did you look into where the money would be better used if the tuition fees were not scrapped, where it would be better to put it? Or not really? I'm just wondering where your remit was.
Well, the remit was primarily, what we wanted to analyse is sort of the way it's funded rather than the outcomes. But we did touch on that. So when the new system came in when the cap went from 3,000 to 9,000, there has been an increase in resources per pupil going to university. So that obviously is positive. But what we didn't look at is whether the universities are spending that wisely or things like that. So that wasn't something we touched on. But I think obviously it's better to get the resources going in. I think one thing that we are critical of the regime is that there is no price competition. So when the Brown Review reported,
that was Gordon Brown, wasn't it?
So actually no, this was an independent review.
This is not right.
By Lord Brown, looking into tuition fees. He suggested actually having no caps on tuition fees, and that would mean that the tuition fees would link much closer to employment prospects. So he was hoping there would be a sort of a market that people could choose from, but because the fees have been capped, there's no price competition. I think that is negative, but we're realistic enough to realise that politically that would be almost impossible to achieve now. So I think we are stuck with the current system.
Yes, I think a lot of people thought that it was a bad idea. First of all, they were capped at 3, weren't they? And then there was a suggestion that some wouldn't charge $3,000, but then everybody charged it, and that's been the whole problem, hasn't it? Is that it seems that if you put the cap at 12,000, they'd probably all go to 12,000. Yeah. There's no competition, as you say. So just remind me, if we did scrap them, how much money would that cost the Treasury?
So I'm going to have to go on the Labour Party's figures when they went into the general elections. So they suggested that scrapping them and reintroducing maintenance grants would cost around £11 billion a year. So just to put that in context, that would be equivalent to about 2.8 percentage points on the basic rate of income tax.
Yeah, so that is a sizable amount of money. Are there more? How many more people are there going to university now? Did you look at that?
So that wasn't included in the report, but now it is approaching quite near to 50% of the population. And obviously there's an understandable resentment to some of the older generation who had their fees completely free. But the main thing to emphasise there is that many fewer people went to university, so it's it's much more affordable to for that to be centrally funded. And I think now, as I said, when you're getting to a position where nearly half of the population are going to university, is it fair for the other half to effectively cross-subsidise that group, particularly when graduates are earning, quite a lot more money, during their careers?
Did you go to university, Daniel?
I did, yes. And I paid the 3,000 fees instantly.
And you've paid them back?
I haven't paid them back, no. So I'm still paying. I'm still paying as I earn.
And are you rather resentful? I didn't go to university, so you can't have a go at me. But are you slightly resentful that other people previously got it for free? No, actually. I as I say, I think the current system strikes, I think, roughly the right balance between the responsibility on the individual and the responsibility on the taxpayer. So what I don't think it's emphasised enough is that you pay as you earn, so it's a progressive system, and after 30 years, if you haven't paid it off, it's all written off. So actually about sort of 40% of the money that's loaned by the government will end up underwriting. So there is a responsibility on the taxpayer. So low-earning non-graduates do get a subsidy from the taxpayer, but high-earning graduates don't. So I think in that sense it's quite a progressive system. You see, I saw an article the other day saying that we should stop calling it debt, because it's not debt like if I have a debt, I have to pay it off, because it isn't. Exactly. It's effectively a risk-free debt. So, I mean, the way the system works is that once you earn above 21,000, everything above that, you get charged 9%, but below that, nothing's charged. One thing we did point out is that the new interest rates are quite punitive. So once you're earning above £40,000 a year, you're charged RPI plus 3% interest rates. And we do think that is perhaps slightly too high. And I think if you wanted to introduce fairness in the system and perhaps get the taxpayer slightly more involved, you could reduce those interest rates so they were, closer to the RPI level of inflation. So I think there is a potential grievance there that maybe the government should look at. Daniel, thank you very much. That's Daniel Mahoney there, the Deputy Director and Head of Economic Research at the Centre for Policy Studies, and he is the author of the